What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our new channel sponsor, International MTG. If you're looking for competitive pricing on your favorite MTG cards, old and new, be sure to check out the International MTG store and TCG Player, link in the description of this video. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we've got an all Rakdos color pairing matchup for you, which includes 2 mono red decks and 2 mono black decks. First up, we have Jacob returning to the channel playing a deck led by Chandra and Fire of Kaladesh. This deck is a Chandra tribal deck which he looks to show off the power of his favorite red Planeswalker. Next, we have Justin playing an old school classic commander Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker. This deck looks to take advantage using Shirei along with the creatures having only 1 power to create an unstoppable value engine. Then we have Fogral playing one of his favorite decks, Varchild, Betrayer of Kjeldor. This is a strange take on a Voltron deck where he wants to deal commander damage to his opponents in order to give them survivors so he can later use them for his own benefit. Last but not least, we have Gavin returning to the table playing Tinybones, Trinket Thief. This deck looks to make his opponents discard as many cards as he can in order to punish them for having empty hands. Now that we have our fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Justin draws and plays a Swamp. Fog draws and plays a Snow-Covered Mountain for turn, then pays 1 for a team pennant. Gavin draws, plays a Swamp, and passes. Jacob draws and plays a tapped Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle. Justin draws, plays a Swamp, and then taps 2 for a Perilous Mirror. Fog draws and plays another Snow-Covered Mountain for turn. Gavin draws and plays an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. He then taps out and casts his commander Tinybones. Jacob draws and plays a Mountain for turn, then taps 1 for a Soul Ring. Justin plays a third Swamp for turn, then taps 2 to foretell a card face down. Fog draws and plays another Snow-Covered Mountain for turn, then taps out to cast his commander Varchild. Gavin plays a Prismatic Vista for turn, then pays 1 life to sack it and go get a Swamp. He then taps 1 to cast a Duress targeting Jacob. Gavin then looks at Jacob's hand and has him discard Chandra Pyrogenius. At the end of turn, Tinybones triggers, having him draw a card and lose a life. Jacob draws and plays a Mountain for turn, then he fiddles with his lands before deciding to tap out and cast his commander Chandra. Justin plays another Swamp for turn, then taps 4 for a Mindless Automaton, which enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters. Fog draws and plays a Snow-Covered Mountain before equipping Varchild with his pennant. He then does the gentlemanly thing and rolls to see who's going to attack first. Fog then swings 4 at Gavin. Gavin takes the damage and gets 4 survivor tokens. Gavin draws and plays a tapped Malakir Mire for turn. He then taps 3 and casts a Dark Deal, having everybody wheel their hands and draw 1 less card. At the end of turn, Tinybones triggers, having him draw a card and lose a life. Jacob draws for turn and plays a Mountain. He then taps Chandra to deal 1 damage to Gavin before casting Chandra Flame's Fury, untapping his commander. Jacob then upticks his Flame's Fury to deal 2 damage to Tinybones, killing him. Justin draws for turn and plays a Swamp. He then taps out to cast his commander Shirei and passes. Fog draws and plays a Snow-Covered Mountain before tapping 1 to play a Soul Ring. He then taps 3 to cast Kusarigama and then equips it to his commander. Fog then goes to combat and swings his commander Jacob for 4. Jacob then takes the damage and gets 4 survivor tokens. Gavin draws and plays another Swamp for turn. He then taps 4 and recasts his commander before tapping 1 more to cast a Necrogen Spellbomb. Jacob plays another Mountain, then taps 2 for Chandra's Regulator. He then downticks Flame's Fury and pays the 1 to copy the ability, dealing 4 damage to Fog and Justin's commanders, killing them. Fog then gains control of all the survivors on the field. Justin draws and plays a Swamp for turn. He then taps 3 to cast Besiege the Queen and goes to tutor for a Dictate of Erebus. Fog plays another Snow-Covered Mountain for turn, then taps a Soul Ring and a Mountain to cast Goblin Bombardment and a Skull Clamp. He then goes through the process of paying 1 to clamp his survivor, killing it in order to draw 2 cards multiple times. Fog then pays 2 to cast Blackblade Reforge and another 1 to clamp another survivor and draw 2 more cards. Gavin plays another Swamp for turn, then taps 2 for a Waste Knot. He then taps another 2 for a Burglar Rat, making each opponent discard a card. He then draws a card and gets 4 black mana. Gavin then plays a mana crypt for turn and uses to cast Rankle, Master of Pranks. He then plays a Cunning Lethal Mantle with the mana he has left. Before going to combat, Fog sacks 2 of his survivors in order to kill Rankle. At the end of turn, Jacob pings Gavin for 1 with Chandra and Tinybones triggers, having him draw a card and lose a life. Jacob draws and plays another mountain for turn. He then taps 6 to cast Chandra Bold Pyromancer. He then responds to the cast by tapping his commander to deal 1 damage to Justin, then untaps her. Jacob then uses the Pyromancer to deal 3 damage to the Lethalmancer, paying to copy it, so he can also take out Tinybones. Justin draws for turn and passes. Fog draws, plays a snow-covered mountain, and then taps 5 to cast Gauntlet of Power, naming red. He then taps enough mana to recast his commander. Gavin rolls for his crypt on his upkeep and wins. He then draws for turn and taps out to cast Tinybones a 3rd time. Gavin then plays a blood crypt for turn and cracks it to go get a snow-covered swamp. He then taps 3 for Necrogen Mist and passes. At the end of his turn, Justin flashes in a Dictative Erebos. Jacob draws for turn and casts a Gorilla Shaman. He then taps his commander to ping Justin for 1, uses the Pyromancer to deal 2 damage to Justin while paying to copy it, and also dealing 2 damage to Fog. He then uses Flame's Fury to deal 2 more damage to Fog. Justin discards for turn and draws. He then taps 3 for a Sky Scanner, drawing a card. Justin then pays 1 more for a Death Cultist. At the end of turn, Tinybones triggers, having Gavin draw a card and lose a life. Fog draws and remembers to discard before drawing again and playing a snow-covered mountain. He then taps enough to equip Varchild with both the Blackbladed Forge and Team Pennant. Fog then taps out and casts Crackled Power for 12, dealing 20 damage to each opponent and 20 damage to Jacob's commander. In response, Jacob pings Fog for 1 with his Chandra. Fog then goes to combat, swinging his commander Jacob. In response, Jacob pays enough to use his Shaman's ability to destroy the Blackblade as well as the Pennant. Jacob then takes the 4 damage and gets 4 more survivors. At the end of turn, Tinybones triggers, having Gavin draw a card and lose a life. Gavin draws and discards for turn, then draws again. He then plays a swamp and pays 1 more for a Sensei's top. Gavin then activates the top, looking at his top 3 and putting them back in any order. He then pays to sack his Spellbomb, making Fog discard his last card, allowing Gavin to draw a card. Gavin then pays a 6 to activate Tinybones' ability, having Fog and Jacob both lose 10 life. At the end of turn, Tinybones triggers, having him draw a card and lose a life. Jacob draws for turn, then attempts to tap enough to catch Yokel Hops, but in response, Fog saves the day by sacking his commander and an additional survivor, dealing 2 damage to Jacob and taking him out of the game. Justin draws for turn and taps 2 for a Clattering Augur, drawing a card and losing a life. He then remembers he should have discarded a card on his upkeep, and at the end of turn, Tinybones triggers, having Gavin draw a card and lose a life. Fog draws for turn, and at this point everybody's forgetting Gavin's upkeep trigger. He then shows the board how he has to pay to equip the survivor with the Skull Clamp, then sacrifice the survivor to the Bombardment in order to deal a damage and draw 2 cards. He then pings Gavin for 1 and taps enough to recast Varchild a 3rd time. Fog then casts Tinza Godo's Maul and equips it to Varchild. He then casts a Rampaging Ferocidon and clamps and sacks another survivor, pinging Gavin and drawing 2 cards. Fog then uses the last of his mana to cast O Naginata and equips it to his commander. On his upkeep, Gavin discards a card and wins his crypt roll. He then plays a Marsh Flats for turn and decides to go out in style by casting a Vampiric Tutor, searching for a card, and killing himself. Justin draws for turn to recast his commander, taking a damage from the Ferocidon. He then goes to combat and swings 1 at Fog, who just takes the hit. Fog draws for turn and plays another snow-covered mountain before equipping his commander with the Kusari Gamma. He then proceeds to go to combat, pumping up his commander +10/+0 and swings out at Justin for the win. The big winner of today's game is Fog playing his Varchild Voltron deck. What can I say, this deck is definitely an extremely convoluted deck to play at times, but when it works, it works. For the first time in channel history, the MVP of today's game isn't an actual card, but the survivor tokens Varchild makes. They seem harmless at first, but they're really the engine that keeps this deck's wheels moving. Without them on the field, I don't know if I could have won today's game. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.